Welcome to Visionary Voices Exchange, the podcast that disrupts how we think about blindness and low vision. So join us as we amplify the voices of individuals, families, and professionals living, learning, and thriving with blindness and low vision. We're your hosts, Janet Lebrecq and Carlos Sullivan. Hello, everyone, and welcome to Visionary Voices Exchange. I am your host, Janet Lebrecq, and I'm here joined by Carlos Sullivan, my co-host. Carlos, want to say hello?
Hello, everyone.
Thanks so much, Carlos. And we have an amazing guest with us on the program. We are pleased to have Mr. Tom Sullivan joining us. And for those of you who don't know Mr. Sullivan, he has a very long career. He has incredible accomplishments and has had a great, I think, career with different industries, which we're going to get into. So first of all, Tom, before we jump into any questions, I want to say thank you for agreeing to join us on Visionary Voices Exchange.
Well, Janet, I haven't met Carlos before, but I'm a huge fan of yours, and the difference you've made in the lives of so many folks with disability, but particularly the blind community, is just terrific. It's amazing that you come to a point in life when you really realize who's valuable in life, and that's how I feel about you. So I'm delighted we're sharing this.
Well, thank you so much. And we want our audience to get to know you too. So how about if we start with your background? Why don't you share with folks where you're from, your family, and we'll take it from there.
You and I have the same accent.
Yes, we do.
I grew up in Boston, in South Boston and West Roxbury. Mm-hmm. My dad ran Irish pubs, so I grew up around the bar world. I have two sisters, both deceased, and my mom. And I was really a kid who, right from the beginning, didn't want being blind to be the dominant factor in my life. And I think, as we go along here and talk about it, a lot of the things that I became involved in found their rhythm in early life. It's funny, I had a call this morning, and maybe this is a great place to start. The call came from a boy, now an old man, but a boy when I was a kid named Bill Hannon. And Bill Hannon was my first friend. He was the first kid that didn't let my being blind be a factor in how he saw me. And the story was, my parents built a fence around my backyard. The idea was keep Tom inside and keep the world outside, because they thought that was the only way I'd be safe. And it was an 8 feet high chain link fence. Down the street, just right down the street from the house, there was a Little League baseball field. And I used to hear kids playing ball down there, and I desperately wanted to be part of that game. But obviously that wasn't going to happen until one May afternoon. I actually remember the date, May 11th, 1957. Two little boys moved into a brand new house that had just been built next door. And I could hear them. They were playing catch in their yard. And I thought, okay, somehow I've got to get to them. I've got to find a way to get to them. And I remember I grabbed hold of the chain link fence and pulled myself up to the top. And it was, again, an 8 foot high fence. And I got to the top, and I didn't know how high it was. So I leaped into space and crashed on the ground. And the two little boys came running up. And this one boy, Billy Hannon, who's been my best friend for 65 years, looked down and he said, wow. He said, that was a gnarly fall. He said, I'm Bill Hannon. I said, I'm Tom Sullivan, and I'm blind. And he went, wow. And then he said, Carlos and Janet, he said the three words that set up my entire life. He looked down and he said, wow. And then he said these three words. He said, want to play. It was that simple.
Mm-hmm.
Just want to play.
That's what we all kids like, yep.
It really was, Carlos, and it changed my life because he began to open up worlds for me. He taught me how to throw a baseball, and he taught me how to throw a football, and But I taught him stuff too. On rainy days, we'd sit in my living room with an old tape recorder, and we'd make up movies and make up sound effects. I taught him about the senses, so we became best pals, interactive friends. And I think for every kid with a disability, that's probably where it has to start, somewhere. Don't you think?
Absolutely. Yes. And so talking
Can you
about,
remember, Jan, I'm curious because I never asked you this. Can you remember your first friend?
I do. Yeah. I mean, because, I grew up in the Berkshires of Massachusetts. And so
Right.
I remember a time, when you knew everybody in your neighborhood. You knew them, they knew you knew their parents, and their parents knew you. So I do remember my first childhood friend.
Because it is the breakthrough period. And then, because you start to, Carlos, you start to believe in yourself. And so for me, that was the breakout moment, and I began what was a true adventure,
So, Tom, talking about blindness and obviously wowing your friend, and he was clearly amazed at the fact that you obviously disclosed that you were blind. He was not expecting that. Talk for a moment about your blindness itself. So what was the eye condition? What was the reason behind your blindness?
I love the word. Now they call it retinopathy of prematurity, right?
Yes.
But back in those days, they called it retrolental fibroplasia. And it's too much oxygen in the incubator. I was 3 months premature, and so it destroys the retina. It's a funny story. When we went later on when I went to Perkins, which, you know a lot about, School for the Blind in Massachusetts, we used to sing, "We've got retrolental fibroplasia, glaucoma, and cataracts too. Our friends say that we're blinks, but they know less than what they think because we've got retrolental fibroplasia." Anyway, it was a stupid thing.
I never knew there was a song. Nobody ever passed that along to me. So
Absolutely. Well, it was, it was. I'll tell you. I think it was actually a bunch of us deciding we hated the whole idea of retrolental fibroplasia. So that was a form of blindness. Yeah, and what's interesting with babies today, because we're saving kids so much earlier in the birth cycle, it's happening again. And it is, and now it's connected with developmental delay. So the issue, when you find a kid that has retrolental or retinopathy, it's quite likely in today's medicine that there are developmental delays, and that's a major issue for parents to have to face.
Sure. And I'm a very, very strong proponent, of, sort of giving information and resources to people, particularly about vision care, because we don't always think about vision care as healthcare. We think about vision care when you're having a problem, and people don't realize that even with your children, many states do have a screening process for infants, and I'm always telling people, please get your child screened before they go to school, because the earlier you have that child evaluated, and if there is a problem, it's much easier, to deal with that early on as opposed to waiting.
It's interesting. I got involved when I began to sort of have show business success and make movies and TV series and things. I got involved. I got a job actually at ABC's Good Morning America, and I was a special correspondent. And my job was to go out and find stories of families who were sort of beating the odds. And the first place they sent me was to a wonderful program here in Los Angeles called the Blind Children's Center. And what fascinated me, and this is maybe, I was in my late 30s by that time, was how the problems of blindness had become even more complicated. And I saw stuff, Janet and Carlos, that was amazing. First of all, when a blind child is struggling with development, there are things that happen or that happen in their operation that are really both touching and scary for parents. Blind kids, for example, very often tend to crawl, when they learn to crawl backwards because they're afraid of hitting their heads.
Mm-hmm.
And blind kids very often have to be taught to chew food because chewing is a visual response. I never thought about that, but when you're a sighted kid, you see someone chew food. It's not a natural reaction. Blind kids' development is in language can be very rapid, but in other cases it can be very slow because kids learn to speak by watching their mother's faces.
Mm-hmm.
So, when we really get into the question of who is the blind child, even in today's world, it's really hard for parents. And I know, Carlos, you probably know this. The divorce rate among families with blind kids is very, very high.
Yeah.
And it's
yeah,
usually because the dads can't take it. The dads cop out. And my father was absolutely that. He left our family when I was 8. So it can be a really difficult thing, and it's a tremendous strain on marriages.
Yeah. And I think also when you think about the family structure, when there is a blind child in the family, you've got multiple things to take into consideration. Number one is obviously the prognosis of the disease. Number two is what the impact of that prognosis means for the individual, but equally important, what it means for the family. And it speaks to exactly what you were just talking about. And it can change role reversals in families and the dynamic of families.
That's brilliant, Janet. That's brilliant. My sisters never could come to terms with the fact that they had a blind brother.
Mm-hmm.
In their head, I was the one that got all the attention.
Sure.
But in my head, I was also the one that was being limited by the circumstance. My parents were overly protective. And it's probably why I got a little crazy, and launched out into life. Because I think I felt that sense of restriction. It's interesting. When I went to Perkins, the blind school. I held a record at Perkins. I was expelled 11 times and sent home for all kinds of things. I mean, my father had the Irish pubs, and when I was in high school, I stole booze from my father's bar and brought them and got the kids loaded. So they sent me home for that. Another time, my best pal Ernie went on to be a nuclear physicist, probably the smartest kid I ever knew. And Ernie figured out the Perkins School for the Blind was right on the Charles River in Boston, and Ernie figured out what the speed of the current was by dropping a fishing line into the water, and he decided that the current flowed at 2.8 miles an hour. Well, Perkins also had a beautiful little pond on the campus, and we had rowboats that you could row around in. So 3 of us tied our sheets together, jumped out of our window, got down, stole a boat, got it out the gate, got it into the Charles River, and we drifted, whatever the number of miles were, out into Boston Harbor, and the Coast Guard had to rescue us. So they sent me home for that, too.
How old were you there?
I was in the 8th grade when we left. When we left Perkins. But you know what it was, and I'm making fun of these things, but what it was about, and Janet, I know you feel this way. It was about wanting to be like other kids in my head.
Sure.
Yeah.
And what I didn't realize was something that comes only when you're mature, and that is as a blind child, you had to do more just to be even.
Yeah.
And I think that's where people's anger comes from. How much does it take? I found I'll never forget this. I said to my father once, Dad, it doesn't do you any good to be the best at being blind if you're the worst at being sighted.
Absolutely. How profound.
It was because that's the way it tracked. And, I was a really fine student. I was as Janet knows, I was lucky and made a lot of hit records and music and movies and series, but that was because I was blessed to have unique talent. But even with that, I went to Harvard. Here's an example. I went to Harvard, college in Boston. And when I was a senior at Harvard, I was number one in my class. Absolutely number one in my class. And I went to the head of my department. It was a sociology department. His name was Dr. James. And I said, Dr. James, what should I be thinking about when I finish here? He said, go get a master's. I said, okay. He said, then what? He said, get a doctorate. I said, then what? He said, why don't you just do what all you blind guys do? He said, teach blind kids. Well, obviously, that wasn't what was on schedule for me. And that's frankly what prompted me to get into music. I got a job in a bar.
Can you tell me what went through your mind and your heart when he told you that?
I know. Thank goodness this is a podcast, so I can say this. I hated this. I hated the son of a bitch.
Well, that's what I'm asking, because you are not the only one that goes through that when we're blind.
That's right. That's absolutely right. Because and we'll get to this. Here's the perception problem. We're being labeled, right? We're being categorized. Here I was at supposedly the best academic school in the world, and this guy knows that I'm number one in my class. I also, by the way, had just won a U.S. national wrestling championship against sighted people. So I was an athlete, and he knew that. But he was still programming me as a blind person and labeling me. So we all of us with blindness face this. But, and I'm jumping a little bit, but this is significant, I think, Janet. One of the dangers in what's going on in the world of special needs now is, and it's a delicate thing to talk about, we're also categorizing ourselves, meaning I'll tell you what, I'm 78 years old. When I leave this earth, here's what I wanted to say on the tombstone. Here lies Tom Sullivan. He was a singer, actor, author, athlete, humanitarian, who, by the way, happened to be blind. If I can move blindness down the levels so that it isn't the obvious frame, then my life will really have been worth something. And I think all the television, all the movies I've made, all the books I've written, all of that's all about trying to say, don't categorize me. Let my life define it. Mm-hmm. Don't you think that that's where we're all trying to go, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. And I want our listeners to kind of have a better picture, about it isn't just about your blindness, but it's about who you are as an individual also. And some of the things that we often like to talk about as well are expectations, setting those expectations. And we say, with regard to expectations, that those expectations start in the family. They start right at home. And oftentimes with a diagnosis of disability or any other, health-related condition, that people set expectations, and those expectations really can define, particularly early on in the process. So if your family thinks, well, I can't expect much from you, but it also starts in the doctor's office. So when you receive that initial diagnosis from your doctor or a team of doctors, and for many of us, it is literally a team of doctors and researchers, and those expectations can actually be set right at the onset of that diagnosis. So how that diagnosis is delivered, what the tone is, what the resources are. Are there resources there? Do they leave you with a sense of hope about the condition and about the trajectory of your life, moving forward? Clearly, you did not let that stop you. So I want to just
no, but
take
you know
a
what,
moment.
Janet? I wish I wish my life had taken a different path. So I went to Perkins,
Mm-hmm.
a wonderful place. A wonderful place. I wouldn't have been as academic had I gone somewhere else. But on the same sense, I was one of the blind kids who would have done really well in public school.
Sure.
So I think the hardest element for a parent is to figure that out. I'm a real believer in state school programs because I think there are a lot of kids who need that extra balance
Mm-hmm.
in their lives.
Sure.
On the other hand, there were kids like you were, Janet, or me. We were people, Carlos, that would have been much, much better served in public programs. So it's for any parent. Boy, it's a complicated conversation. Where are the needs?
It is. And I think also, thinking back on the time, the date, the years, when you went through the school systems and the difference in what was even available for resources, during those days. We didn't have assistive technology, back in those days. We didn't have the tools and the training, for the teachers, to be able to understand. But in spite of that, Tom, your career flourished, excelled actually, and you have been in movies. You have been on the talk shows, the nightly talk shows. You've had two Grammy nominations or Emmy nominations?
Yeah, and an Academy Award.
You are the subject of movies. You've been in movies. You've been portrayed and acted on Highway to Heaven. I think you did something with Fame, the show, the movie Fame.
I did.
Yeah, and several others, programs. And so when you think about the days that you went through your career in media and in the entertainment industry, because you actually, combine, both, and there weren't any other blind people during that time that were combining those two. We had entertainers like Ray Charles, and we had Stevie Wonder, but they were not in the media industry at that time in terms of the programs that you were on, in terms of hosting and co-hosting some of those programs.
Well, you know what, everybody, Carlos, Janet, I what's the Babe Ruth, Lou Gehrig thing? I feel like I'm the luckiest person on the face of the earth, because I know that somewhere in my Irish soul, I was blessed with talent, and so my road, in some ways, was so much easier than so many. And yet, I'm what has come out of it in terms of my sense of self is that I think every human being on this earth, no matter what disability they face, I think every human being in the world has something really important to offer. The question is, can they find it in themselves? Can they find it and allow it to come out? I'll give you a wonderful example. I have a friend named Michael Rance, and I love this story because he's so Michael Rance has grade 4 cerebral palsy. I mean, really severe. His speech is limited. His mobility is in many ways limited. But he is the smartest human being I've ever met, and he is the single most sort of awesome person. The best way, let me take you through the quick story. So I got involved in the National Sports Center for the Disabled in Winter Park, Colorado. It's where a man named Hal O'Leary created a program to teach all disabilities to enjoy skiing. And I love to ski. My daughter Blythe is my ski guide. So I was there, this is many Christmases ago, and the phone rang in the office, and the guy on the other end was this guy, Mike Rance. And they were having trouble understanding him. And so the founder of the program, Hal O'Leary, said to me, geez, I got a guy on the phone here. He's got to be stoned. He's ripped on drugs. Well, it turns out 2 days later, he and his brother arrived. His brother and a cousin literally carried him into the program because he couldn't walk in the snow. Carried him into the program. 5 years later, this guy was married, had 2 children, had become the director of all disabled ski programs in the program, and was the single most obnoxious, wonderful human being that God ever put on the earth. Where I'm going with this is, nobody would have ever projected this for him.
Mm-hmm.
But a circumstance happened to collide. Circumstances collided, and he was able to find his path, which is what I think is true for all of us. There is a path. There is a path. It's just that sometimes it's covered with with dirt, and you can't find it. But this guy just changed my life. In fact, can I give you one more quick story about this?
Please.
Okay. It was Christmas Eve, and we were up there skiing, and by this time, this guy was a very successful, person in the program. And Patty, my beautiful Patty, wife of 56 years, said, "Listen, I want to get a Christmas tree for Christmas Eve." And Mike Rance, the guy with cerebral palsy, and I'm mimicking his voice, he said, "Well, I think Tom and I can go out in the woods and cut one down." Really? Well, yeah. I got a snowmobile. We'll get a saw and an axe, and we'll go out there and we'll cut a Christmas tree down. Now you got to picture this. You got a guy with cerebral palsy driving a snowmobile with a blind guy on the back with a saw and an axe and a couple of, frankly, 6-packs of Budweiser. We go out in the woods, and all at once, he said to me, "Oh, my God, I'm having a spasm." Well, he had a spasm, and we tipped over in the snowmobile. Now you have a blind guy with cerebral palsy, saw and an axe, and a tipped-over snowmobile. He said to me, "Well, you're a big, strong guy. Pick it up." I said, "What are you talking about?" He said, "Get under the snowmobile and get it back up on its wheels." So I sort of got down there, and somehow, with a little help from him, we got it back up on its wheels. And then he said, "Tom, this is amazing. Right there in front of you, 15 feet away, is the most beautiful Christmas tree in the world." He said, "Go cut it down." So now I've got the saw and the axe, and I start to work on the tree, and now I'm so excited. I'm in the woods, and I'm singing, "Oh, Holy Night," and it's bouncing around the trees, and I think I sound great. All at once, we hear sirens. It turns out we were in the middle of the busiest ski run in Winter Park, Colorado, cutting a tree down. The ski patrol arrested us, and on Christmas Eve, we had to go to jail. Yeah.
Oh, my gosh.
They took our picture. I've got my mug shot. Patty had to scramble around and find $300 for bail for the 2 of us. And so we're in jail together. And I said to him, "Mike, what were you thinking?" He said, "Well," he said, "I didn't think they'd ever arrest 2 gimps." That was, one of the wild stories of my life.
Yeah.
Trouble definitely follows you.
Well, it does. But you know what? But the point was, both of us were just, we were relishing life, treasuring the experience, wanting it to be wonderful. And he's been, I've known this guy now since 1980. And he lives in Arizona, has a wife and the 2 children, and now they've got grandchildren. And, he built a wonderful life, and he changed lives. That program, Janet, in Winter Park, Colorado, as of this year, has now had 130,000 disabled people go through it, representing 82 different disabilities. It's one of the great programs in the world. Carlos, we got to get you out there. It's a very special place.
Let's do it. Yeah.
It's,
You know what, Tom? listening to you, I'm a director of an agency for the blind and trying to motivate people, promote, I keep thinking I heard a lot of stories, and listening to you is like, I'm so glad to be here next to Janet and meet you. And the stories you told us are so moving that many times you don't need extra words. We don't have much time, but what will be your message to those young kids and some parents maybe about their
Oh,
lives?
I'm glad you. Thank you, Carlos. I'm glad you asked. Remember before I was talking about how we all paint pictures of ourselves, and I was saying on the tombstone I want to be thought of as a husband, father, author, actor, all these things, with blindness down the list. If I could advise any child with a disability, it's please don't understate your disability, but don't overstate it either.
Mm-hmm.
There's a huge, one of the things that frightens me very, very much, and it isn't just about disability. It's in this country. It's about race relations. It's about ethnic issues. And that is, it's almost as if society is hiding behind the problem, not coming out and facing it directly. And so I've got a lot of folks with disability, friends of mine, who make the disability the central theme of their lives. And I think that's a real danger. I really do. I'm not understating being blind, and I know, Janet, you don't. But
Right.
You can't overstate it either, right?
Yep.
Absolutely. And I think some of that goes back to expectations again also, the messaging that we get. And unfortunately, I think in our society, we all get the message, that disability is something that we should be absolutely devastated over. And yes, it is challenging. Yes, it is upsetting. But it sounds kind of trivial sometimes to say, the phrase, don't let your disability define you. But it is absolutely, I think, critical that people not let it define you, because if we don't find the people who are either in our family, in our community, mentors, leaders who really inspire us or that are going to help us along our journey, everyone's looking for that support, then it's really hard to get outside of that messaging, and we struggle with that as a society in general.
I'm glad you said this. I could not have ever found my path without Billy Hannon, the first boy.
Mm-hmm.
And I would never have had the life I've had if it hadn't been for Patty, the woman I've been married to for 56 wonderful years.
Mm-hmm.
And so you don't get there alone. I was thinking about before I talked to you guys today, I was out. I love to play golf. I'm a fanatic. Well, that game can't happen unless there's a wonderful guy with two good eyes to line the shots up.
Mm-hmm.
So we are interactive. And one of the things that, once you get past the angry period, and every disabled person has it, once you get past the angry period, if you're lucky, you start to realize how special it is when you have relationships with others who participate with you. I mean, everything about my life couldn't ever have occurred. Oh, here's an example. Janet, right now, I don't know if your dog is with you, but right now, my guide dog is laying on my foot. Well, you and I wouldn't have the independence we have if we hadn't had a Russell and a Patty, and we hadn't had the wonderful animals that have served us so well, offering the purest form of love. I mean, and so I'll tell you, at this age, at my age now, I'm humbled by the recognition that for all the stories I can tell you and all the success I've had, in so many areas, all the books and movies and all those things, and frankly, all the money it's made. It couldn't have occurred without humans
That's
who
right.
participated.
Absolutely. And
it's easy to forget that. When you get hung up on your own anger, don't you think? It's easy to lose track of that.
Yep.
Yep. It's so true. Carlos and I have been in the field of rehabilitation now for a long time. And I think that, when I think back on all the cases, that I've case managed of clients, and we know as professionals, that anyone who acquires a disability or who is born with a disability, that you're going to go through various stages of adjustment. The adjustment process is often, compared to the grieving process, the various similar stages, that we all experience, we all go through. And it is absolutely incredible, that we have the opportunity, number one, to be out there as role models or mentors, for others, and who may be experiencing similar or different disabilities. But the important part is that they get to see, even if they can't see it for themselves now, during that time, they eventually get through that process and they get to see what could be, in the future. And I think that is what's so incredibly important about having role models as well. And then, you're venturing into both media and into the movies. You're an author. I want to just speak for a moment about your the movie that was done, that you did, and it was titled "If You Could See What I Hear."
Yeah.
And that particular movie, what I'm curious about with that particular movie is, number one, how did you get into the movie industry? Because there is a movement now where people with disabilities are actually involved, in advocacy efforts to get into Hollywood and to be portrayed, authentically in character in movies.
You're asking a wonderful question, Janet, as you always do, but it's even that is complicated. And let me take you through this. First, I'll tell you about the "If You Could See What I Hear" movie. What I'm most proud of about that film, I had written the book first, "If You Could See What I Hear," and then a fellow named Stuart Gillard and I wrote the script, and we raised the money in Canada. It was a Canadian film. It did extremely well at the box office, but one of the reasons was that because we made a very aggressive decision. We chose to tell a story about Tom in college, and it's the thing that made the movie, I think, ring in the hearts and heads of people, is that it was the first time people laughed with disability, not at it.
Mm-hmm.
And that's the part of it I think I'm most proud of. It brought people to a different thought process about the character, about Tom Sullivan, and about his coping with his particular disability. But it was laughing with it, not at it. That's one part about it. In terms of the acting issues for disabled people who want to get involved in movies and television, I'll tell you one of the funny stories about it, because it does sum it up. There was a TV series on, I think some of you may remember it, called Dynasty.
Yes.
Yeah.
And Carlos, they wrote a part in Dynasty for a blind country western singer who was supposed to fall in love with Linda Evans, but Crystal on the show. And I heard my agent mentioned it, so Patty and I decided I was going to get that part. So we went out. I bought cowboy hat, jeans, cowboy boots, a big damn belt. I called a bunch of my musician friends. We went into the recording studio. I wrote a country song, and we went into audition. I did the reading with Linda Evans, and the whole room applauded, the casting people. And I thought, I've got this job. Well, the show was being produced by Aaron Spelling, who at the time was the most famous television producer in the world.
Yes.
And he turned to his assistant. Her name was Esther, and he had a real gruff voice, and he went, "Esther, I don't know what we're going to do. You know what, Esther? He's too damn good at being blind."
Oh, no.
And I didn't get the part. They hired a sighted guy to play it. So,
wow.
The point of this is getting roles, and there's another element too, and it's a delicate one. So years later, I wrote a script for a movie called Daredevil, and at the time there was some conversation about my doing it as an actor, but it required some stunts that I couldn't have done them.
Yeah.
Okay, so there are moments and so Ben Affleck played the part, but the point is there are things that happen in film that go past your disability, and so there's got to be a balance in it all, but that doesn't affect any possibility of folks with disability producing films or directing films, or they're just, obviously I'm not going to get a part playing for the Red Sox or something, so I hope we're seeing breakthroughs. In fact, this brings up a question, and I'd like to ask you both one, and please both of you comment. Where do you think the state of careers are now for folks with disability, particularly blindness? Do you see us really breaking through, or is it still an uphill climb?
I think we are making progress, and that's thanks to people like you, who we can use as role models. I can see, I also went to law school. Back then, we never saw a blind person going to arguing front of the Supreme Court. Now we saw that blind scientist was exceptions. Now we can see more of those things. We still have a lot of work to do, though. But thanks to people like you, we can tell other folks, look at Tom, look at so-and-so. And that's why we're having this podcast too, so we can show others what folks like you are doing or did, so they can get inspired and start doing things. And not just...
So, Carlos, in your work, are you calling on corporations on behalf of folks with special needs? Is that part of your job?
Yes. Yeah.
Do you sense that companies are more open to these possibilities? Where do you think? What's the state of it now?
I still see resistance.
So you still feel a sense of resistance out there?
Oh yeah. Or many times the quote-unquote job for the blind,
Well, and no one knows more about this than Janet, based on what you did during the Obama years, Janet. Carlos, I've said this publicly to a lot of people. Janet is my hero.
Oh yeah.
She went out as an African American woman who also happened to be blind, and if I may say this, kicked ass and took names. I mean, it's an astounding achievement, Janet. So, from your point of view, Janet, where are we? Are we breaking through? Or how do you sense? What do your tea leaves say now?
I do think we're breaking through. I think that, and one of the reasons why I do think that we are breaking through, and Carlos is absolutely correct, in thinking about, the partnerships, the relationships. Do we have more work to do? We absolutely do. And I think, though, that one of the things that has really been helpful for us, and I've met with, multiple entrepreneurs who are developing products for individuals with disabilities. And, many people don't understand also that some of the technology solutions that we're using today actually started in the disability community. They were accommodations for people with disabilities. When you think about software solutions such as Dragon, Dragon was initially developed. for people
I
with
wouldn't
disabilities.
have written books. I would not have written books without dragon speech.
Yeah, absolutely. And there are many, many more. I remember having the first talking calculator when I was in high school, and it was made by Sharp. And there was another one also, which the name escapes me. But I think that we have such an amazing opportunity to leverage technology to help break down some of those barriers. Attitudes, obviously, I think, are much more complex, and oftentimes I think the secret, to some of the accomplishments that I've made, that you've made, Carlos has made, really comes from looking at the individual, but whether it's corporate, the corporate world, whether it's, the school systems, it's all about relationships. And particularly for the disability community, it has to come down, to relationships, building those relationships, but also equally important, maintaining those relationships, because that's how we get those opportunities.
You mentioned the school systems. If somebody said, and Carlos, you may have feelings about this too, I'm still very concerned about special classrooms. If you look at a SPED teacher, special education teacher, he or she stands in the front of the room, and in the room are, let's say, 3 kids who are blind, 2 kids who are deaf, a couple of kids who are Down syndrome. You might have 3 wheelchair-bound kids. All the disabilities kind of thrown into a special classroom, and I think it limits everybody. And the interaction needs to be, every public school needs to be integrating our kids. This idea of isolation really is isolation.
It is, yeah.
And don't you think that has to improve?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that the sooner we, address that, we do have kind of a double-edged sword, that we've created, but it's a positive double-edged sword in a way, because we, during our younger years, we didn't get a chance to go into public school because the resources were not there. The technology was not there, just as I said earlier. But now these few generations, are educated in the school systems, but even more importantly, they're better integrated into their communities. We still have a long way to go for that part of things too, because it isn't just the education system. It's really about the word that we hear over and over and over again, true inclusion. We talk about inclusion, but we don't really live it. But,
boy, God love you, Janet. God love you, Janet. You're dead right.
But the younger population.
I still, even at this stage of my life, I still don't feel completely inclusive. Mm-hmm. There are times, and Carlos, I'm sure you feel this way. There are times when you know that the people that you're with are still categorizing you. Yeah. And you feel it. Do you know here's the worst thing that people do to me sometimes, and I think it's probably because of all the television and stuff I've done. A guy will walk up to me and say, "Who am I?" "Oh, sir, I'm sorry, I don't really know." "Oh, sure you do. You hear that voice, you know." "Well, no, I don't." It's the single most annoying thing that humans do. I mean, I don't know where they...
I think that some of those, there is a part about, having a disability that isn't just all depression and sadness, but a big part of it also is about knowing, where to blur those lines, knowing, how to use humor, to help you navigate your way through life. And I think that goes beyond, the disability community. And I think that I do believe that people do want to be sensitive. They do want to be helpful. But again, there's a balance there also. And at the same time, I've learned about my own self. When I was going through my adjustment process, I expected everybody to understand me, but I didn't expect myself to understand other people and what they were experiencing. And, I finally had to come to that conclusion that, what, I've got to reverse this because they don't know, they're trying and they feel awkward, and that's not a bad thing. It's an opportunity.
You're such a bright person, Jim, and you couldn't have said that better. It took me a long time, and I'm curious about this for Carlos. It took me a long time to get to the place where I really was able to say I can separate the people who really mean well but just screw it up from the people who are jerks. And don't you think you develop a radar or some system where you measure where somebody's coming from?
Yeah.
At least for me, I'm finally, Carlos, at a place in my life when, as long as I know that they're genuinely trying to be helpful or supportive, I can accept almost anything, as long as I sense that it comes from a place of goodness.
Yeah.
But it takes a long time. Takes a long time to get there, doesn't it?
Well, it does, and it comes with experience and a lot of training too.
Mm-hmm.
In my case,
Carlos, I thought I heard you say earlier you went to law school.
I did, in New Mexico.
Okay. Were you at that level? Where you were working to get your degree, your law degree. Was your treatment pretty good, or did you still feel on the outside?
No, treatment was very good there in that law school. However, for instance, I graduated on the top 10 and I didn't get any job interview.
Yeah.
They will come, the job fair, different law firms will come, and everybody who was on the top 10 was getting an interview, but not me.
Yeah. That's such a common experience. But Tom, in the last few minutes here, we're coming down to the end of our hour. I wish we had you longer. Can you just please give some parting words of encouragement, whether it's to those young people who might be out there looking for employment, or they want to be in the entertainment industry, or whether it's to those families who are, recently received a diagnosis in their family of somebody with a disability. Can you just leave us with some hope?
Well, there are some rules, aren't there, everybody? The first rule is don't allow the disability to be more or less than is necessary. That's the first fundamental rule for a parent or a child to think about. Don't let it be more or less than a necessity. The next thing, I think, is to find a level in your own life of pride in who you are. And I've thought about this a lot. I define pride as personal responsibility for individual daily effort. And with disability, you have to take a personal responsibility for your own individual daily effort, and it's going to be more substantial. The next element in that is to recognize you don't get there alone, and you need people to share it with. And finding them means that you then have to treasure them. The third element, as far as I'm concerned, is to recognize that we're all on a search for purpose, to be a purposeful human being, and it doesn't have anything to do with disability. You can find that sense of purpose if you're willing to pay the price and search for it. And the last word is the thing that, Janet, you have in spades. The word is passion. To be a passionate person, to acknowledge that you can't succeed if you don't wake up every day saying to yourself, I'm passionate about this day. This day has to matter. And Carlos, at my stage of life, 78 years old, every day has to count for me. Because I'm very aware that I'm on the the backstretch of life, the last turn. And it has to, at this stage, it has to matter. So pride in people with purpose and passion. Pride in people with purpose and passion. I think that's
absolutely wonderful. Thank you for that.
Thank you, Tom. Thank you.
Really want to thank you so much for joining us on Visionary Voices Exchange. We hope to have you back again in the future. You are truly inspirational and have a lot of insight that I think individuals can benefit from. So thank you again for joining us.
When I turn 78, I wish I will be like you.
Oh, no, Carlos, you're way ahead of me, pal. Listen, I'm the guy that got arrested for cutting down a Christmas tree.
Well, one of these days I'll tell the story when I was arrested too.
Oh, my goodness.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you so much, Tom. Take care. Thank you for joining us on Visionary Voices, folks.